The silence in the car was the first sign, not a comfortable, companionable silence, but a brittle, heavy one. I watched the houses of our manicured suburban street slide by, each one a perfect little box containing a perfect little life, a life I thought was ours. For 15 years, our life had been built around the scaffolding of his career. He was the provider, the rock, the man with the plan. I was the support system, the chief operating officer of our home and our children's lives, a role I had accepted willingly, lovingly. I had packed away my own ambitions like old sweaters, storing them in a cedar chest in the back of my mind, convinced they were no longer a good fit. His job at the corporate headquarters downtown wasn't just a job, it was our identity. It paid for the mortgage, the family vacations, the children's private school. It dictated our social circle and the rhythm of our days. I was proud of him, proud of the life we had built on the foundation of his steady, reliable success. When he walked through the door that evening, he didn't drop his briefcase by the door with its usual thud. He held onto it like a shield. His face, usually ruddy and confident, was the color of ash. He told me the news in a flat, monotone voice that didn't sound like his own. Restructuring, downsizing, redundancy. Corporate euphemisms for a life being gutted. The company he had given the best years of his life to had escorted him to the door with a cardboard box and a severance package that felt like an insult. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The fear that followed was a cold, creeping thing, a poison seeping into the foundations of our perfect life. His confidence, once his most defining feature, had crumbled into dust. He was a king dethroned, wandering aimlessly through the rooms of a castle he could no longer afford. The first few weeks were a blur of bewildered grief. He tried to project an air of calm, assuring me that with his experience, his resume, he'd have a new, better job in a month tops. But I saw the way he stared at the ceiling late at night, the frantic, desperate energy with which he scoured job listings, the forced optimism in his voice that cracked under the slightest pressure. The month passed, then another. The severance money, which had seemed like a comfortable cushion, was shrinking at an alarming rate. The rejections, or worse, the silence, started to chip away at him. The king was becoming a ghost. It was during this slow-motion collapse that the old sweaters in the back of my mind began to feel like they might fit again. An idea I'd had years ago, before the children, before I had fully submerged myself in his life, began to resurface. It was an idea born from my own frustration as a consumer, a simple concept I was convinced had a place in the market. I had noticed a gap, a need for eco-friendly, beautifully designed subscription boxes for household essentials, the kind of thing people bought every month anyway, but done better, smarter, and with a conscience. I had sketchbooks from years ago filled with branding ideas, supplier lists, and logistical flowcharts. It was a fully formed dream, just gathering dust. As our financial situation grew more precarious, my dream began to feel less like a fantasy and more like a necessity. I spent weeks refining the old plan, updating it with new market research, building a lean financial model. I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. I decided to unveil it at the worst possible time in the worst possible place, his parents' house, during one of our tense, obligatory Sunday dinners. I thought they would see it as a sign of my proactivity, my commitment to our family's survival. I laid out my proposal with trembling hands, my voice full of a hope that in retrospect was tragically naive. The silence that greeted me was worse than the one in the car that first day. It was thick with disbelief and a barely concealed pity. Then came the laughter. It started with his brother, a smug investment banker who saw the world in spreadsheets and profit margins. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh full of condescension. A soap of the month club, he sneered, deliberately mischaracterizing my entire concept. Honey, stick to the grocery shopping, leave the business to the big boys. His mother was kinder, but her words were just as sharp, wrapped in the soft cotton of her concern. Oh dear, she said, patting my hand as if I were a hysterical child. You have so much on your plate already. Your focus should be on supporting your husband through this difficult time, not getting distracted by projects. I looked to my husband, my last hope for an ally. I saw him sitting there, his face a mask of shame and wounded pride. My ambition was not a lifeline to him, it was a judgment. It was a spotlight on his failure. He didn't defend me, he joined them. It's a cute idea, honey, he said, the word cute landing like a slap. A nice little hobby to keep you busy. But I'm the one with the business experience. Let me worry about the finances. I'll find a real job, we just need to be patient. A real job, a cute idea. His words, his family's laughter echoed in my ears. They saw me as a dilettante, a housewife playing dress-up. They had no idea of the hours of research I had poured into this, of the fierce, burning belief I had in its potential. They looked at me and saw the woman I had been for the last 15 years, not the woman I was capable of becoming. Something inside me snapped that day. The hurt was immense, a deep, crushing weight, but beneath the hurt something else was born, a cold, quiet, diamond-hard resolve. Their mockery was a gift, their condescension was the fuel I had been missing. They thought they were putting me in my place, but they were just showing me the starting line. I smiled, a tight, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're right," I said, the lie tasting like acid in my mouth. "It's a silly idea, I'll forget about it." I wouldn't forget, I would just go underground. The next day I went to the bank. Years before, my grandmother had left me a small inheritance, a few $1,000s I had kept in a separate account. It was my rainy day fund and it was starting to pour. I registered a business name online. I chose something deliberately anonymous and corporate sounding, Veridian Essentials. It sounded stable, trustworthy, and had no connection to me. My kitchen table became my headquarters. My days were a masterclass in covert operations. I'd do the school run, come home, and spend every second until the kids returned making calls to suppliers, negotiating with manufacturers, and designing a website. I taught myself about SEO, about digital marketing, about supply chain management. The hours between the kids' bedtime and 2 in the morning were my prime time. The house would be silent, save for the sound of my keyboard clicking and the low hum of the refrigerator. My husband was a ghost in this new life. He was consumed by his own failing job search, a demoralizing cycle of applications and rejections. He'd spend his days on the couch, the blue light of the laptop illuminating his increasingly defeated face. He barely noticed my frantic activity. If he saw me on my computer, he assumed I was paying bills or helping the kids with homework. My cute idea had been so effectively dismissed that he never gave it a second thought. I landed my first major supplier, a small, family-owned apiary that made the most beautiful organic soaps and balms. The owner, a woman named Alina, believed in my vision. Her belief was a balm to my wounded spirit. The first batch of inventory arrived on a pallet, which I had to frantically unpack and hide in the garage before he got home. I launched the website. For a week, nothing happened. The silence was terrifying. I was convinced his family had been right, that I was a fool. Then the first order came in, then another, and another. A popular mommy blogger discovered my site and wrote a glowing review. That night my phone buzzed with so many sale notifications that I had to silence it. I was packing boxes on the living room floor at 3 a.m., tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down my face when he came downstairs for a glass of water. He just glanced at the stacks of boxes, the shipping labels, the general chaos. "Having a clear out?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep and indifference. "Something like that," I replied, my heart pounding. He just nodded and went back to bed. He didn't see a business being born. He just saw his wife tidying up. He had no idea he was looking at our salvation, and he had already dismissed it as junk. The kitchen table was no longer big enough. Our garage, once a tidy graveyard for bicycles and old paint cans, was now a makeshift fulfillment center. Every day was a frantic race against the clock, a carefully choreographed ballet of inventory management, packing, and shipping, all timed to coincide with his rare excursions out of the house for yet another demoralizing job interview. The business, Veridian Essentials, was growing at a speed that was both thrilling and terrifying. My initial projections, the ones his brother had laughed at, were shattered within the first 3 months. The mommy blogger's review had been a spark, but the quality of the products and the story I was weaving around the brand, a story of sustainable, mindful living, was the fuel. It resonated with people. It turned out I wasn't the only one craving a simpler, more conscious way of living. My life became a study in duality. I was a CEO in yoga pants, conducting supplier negotiations on my cell phone from the school pickup line, hiding invoices under couch cushions, and using the code word book club for my late-night meetings with a freelance graphic designer. To my husband and his family, I was just a dutiful housewife, perhaps a little more frazzled than usual, but that was to be expected, given our difficult circumstances. Meanwhile, his world was shrinking. The corporate giant he had once been was now a man drowning in a sea of rejection. His confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, bitter resentment that poisoned the air in our home. He stopped even pretending to look for jobs with the same vigor. He'd sleep late, watch television for hours, and sigh heavily whenever I asked about his day. He was in mourning for the life he had lost, and he had no idea that a new one was being built all around him, silently and without his permission. The financial pressure was immense. His severance was gone. I started to funnel money from the Veridian business account into our joint account. I did it in small, irregular amounts, disguising them as refunds from old utility bills or a forgotten savings bond cashing out. I'd tell him I'd found a new way to budget our groceries that was saving us hundreds a month. He was so wrapped up in his own misery, so convinced of his role as the sole provider that he never questioned it. His pride wouldn't allow him to believe that his unskilled wife could be the one keeping their heads above water. It was a lie that was both necessary and deeply exhausting. The tipping point came when I landed my first corporate client, A boutique hotel chain wanted to stock their bathrooms with my products. The order was so large it was laughable to think I could fulfill it from my garage. I had to scale up and fast. This was no longer a hobby. This was a real company, and it needed a real home. I used the initial deposit from the hotel chain to lease a small warehouse space in a nondescript industrial park on the other side of town. The day I signed the lease was the most terrifying and liberating day of my life. This was real. There was no going back. I hired my first 2 employees, 2 young mothers from my neighborhood who were looking for flexible work. They saw my vision, felt my passion, and their belief in me was like water in a desert. The warehouse became my sanctuary, the one place I could be myself, the one place I was the boss. The contrast became more and more jarring. I would spend my day making executive decisions, managing staff, and projecting quarterly growth, and then I would come home to a man who would complain that I'd forgot to buy his favorite brand of coffee. The power dynamic of our marriage had completely inverted, but only one of us knew it. As Veridian grew, I knew I couldn't run it alone. I needed a proper team. I hired an operations manager, a marketing director, a full-time finance person. My anonymous little company was becoming a significant local employer. We were getting press in local business journals. We were winning awards, and I was still completely invisible, the ghost in my own machine. I made a conscious decision to remain the anonymous founder. My marketing director was the public face of the company. It was a necessary precaution. I wasn't ready for the reveal, not yet. One evening, my HR manager sent me a batch of CVs for a junior marketing assistant role. As I scrolled through them, one name jumped out at me. It was him, my husband. He was applying for an entry-level job at my company. His cover letter was painful to read. It was a hollow echo of his former confidence, full of corporate jargon that couldn't quite mask the desperation. He wrote about his admiration for Veridian's disruptive market strategy and its meteoric rise. He was praising a company whose very existence he had mocked. I stared at the screen for a long time, a bitter, ironic taste in my mouth. I instructed HR to send him a standard, automated rejection email. It felt cruel, but it was a cruelty born of a deep, unhealed wound. A month later, another application arrived, this time for a warehouse associate position. The desperation was palpable. His list of qualifications was so far above the requirements of the job it was almost tragic. He was a former executive, willing to pack boxes for a fraction of his old salary. Again, I told HR to reject him. This became a pattern. Over the next 6 months, he applied 4 more times, each time for a different, progressively more junior role: customer service representative, administrative assistant. He was casting a net into the dark, completely unaware that the person who kept throwing it back was the woman sleeping next to him every night. His family's pity for him was matched only by their condescension towards me. At another family dinner, his brother asked me if I had finally given up on that little soap business and gotten a part-time job to help out. "I'm keeping busy," I said, the same noncommittal answer I always gave. My husband just stared at his plate, the shame radiating off him in waves. He was too broken to even mock me anymore. Later that night, he broke down. The rejections, the silence, the mounting debt he thought we were in had finally crushed him. He confessed that he felt like a failure, that he was letting us all down. And then he told me about his last hope, this amazing local company, Veridian Essentials. He said it was his dream job, that he admired everything about them, that he just needed one chance to get his foot in the door. He told me he'd been rejected 5 times and couldn't understand why. He was at the end of his rope. He was begging a cruel, faceless corporation for a lifeline, a corporation that was currently paying the mortgage on his house. The web of my secret life was becoming impossibly complex. My success was a constant, silent rebuke to his failure. I was his anonymous tormentor and his secret savior, and he had no idea. He was a ghost in his own life, and the world he was haunting was one I had built from the ashes of the one he had let burn. He was a hollowed-out version of the man I had married. The arrogance and easy confidence that had once defined him had been eroded away by a year of failure, leaving behind a brittle, desperate shell. He'd lost weight, and his expensive suits, now reserved for the funerals of his career prospects, hung loosely on his frame. The man who had laughed at my ambition was now a man who barely had the energy to get off the couch. His final breakdown was not loud or angry. It was a quiet, pathetic implosion. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my company had been born, and stared at a pile of unpaid bills that I had deliberately let accumulate for his benefit, a piece of theater to maintain the illusion of our shared struggle. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook with silent, defeated sobs. He told me he was finished, that he had nothing left. He confessed that he had applied for a job as a delivery driver and hadn't even gotten an interview. And then he brought it up again, the name that had become a bitter joke only I understood, Veridian Essentials. He spoke of the company with a kind of desperate reverence, as if it were a mythical kingdom he could never enter. He called it his last chance, the one place he felt he could start over. He'd been rejected 5 times, he said again, his voice cracking. He didn't understand what he was doing wrong. And then he looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading, with a look I hadn't seen since we were young and broke and facing the world together. "You're so good with things like this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Your resumes for the PTA were always so perfect. Would you look at my application? Maybe you could see something I'm missing. Please, I don't know who else to ask." The irony was a physical force, so strong it almost made me laugh. The man who had told me to stick to grocery shopping was now asking me for career advice. The man who had dismissed my business acumen was now begging for my help to get a job at the very business he had mocked. This was the moment, the culmination of a year of silent, relentless work. The anger I had nursed for so long had cooled into something harder and more precise. It was no longer about revenge, it was about truth. I took his resume, the paper limp and slightly crumpled from his anxious hands. I made a show of reading it, of frowning thoughtfully. "I think I know someone who works in their HR department," I lied, the words flowing with an ease that surprised me. "A friend of a friend, let me make a call. No promises, but maybe I can get them to at least look at it again." The hope that flared in his eyes was almost pitiful. He thanked me over and over, calling me his angel, his savior. He had no idea he was thanking the very person who had orchestrated his rejection 5 times. The next morning, I walked into my office, a gleaming corner suite with a view that stretched to the horizon, a view he had no idea existed. I called my head of HR, a sharp, intuitive woman named Clara whom I trusted implicitly. I told her to pull his application from the slush pile. "Schedule an interview for him," I said, "for the marketing coordinator position." "And Clara," I added, my voice perfectly steady, "tell him the final interview will be with the CEO." A week later, he was a different person. The glimmer of hope had transformed him. He got a haircut, he had his best suit dry cleaned. He practiced his answers in the mirror. He was so grateful, so touchingly optimistic. He told me over dinner that he was going to nail this interview, that this was the one. He felt it in his bones. He had no idea the bones he was feeling were part of the skeleton in our marriage's closet. The day of his interview, I left for a long lunch with a friend. I went to my office and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the city, my city. I changed out of the jeans and sweater I'd left the house in and into a tailored dark navy dress that was the color of power. My assistant brought me a coffee. My COO came in to brief me on the quarterly numbers. I was calm. I was ready. Clara buzzed me, "He's here." I told her to show him into the main boardroom in 5 minutes. I walked in and took my place at the head of the long, polished table. My senior management team, the people who had helped me build this empire, were seated along the sides. They all knew the situation. They were my silent, loyal army. The door opened. He walked in, his head down, clutching his worn leather portfolio like a shield. He looked nervous, small, completely out of his depth. My assistant offered him a water and his hand trembled as he took it. "Thank you so much for this opportunity," he said to the room at large, his eyes still fixed on the table in front of him. "I know my previous applications were unsuccessful, but I'm confident that I have the skills and the passion to be a real asset to Viridian." He finally took a breath and looked up, ready to make eye contact with the CEO, the faceless arbiter of his fate, and his eyes met mine. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the sequence of emotions play across his face like a film in slow motion. First, a flicker of confusion, as if his brain couldn't process me being in this context. Then a dawning, sickening comprehension. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray pallor. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I could see the mental calculus happening behind his eyes, the frantic clicking as all the pieces fell into place with brutal, devastating clarity. My late nights. My distractions. My secret phone calls, the mysterious money that had kept our family afloat, his 5 rejections, it all converged in this single, horrifying moment of revelation. He wasn't just in an interview, he was on trial, and the judge was the woman he had laughed at, the woman he had called a failure. The room was utterly silent. My team watched him, their faces impassive. There was no pity, only a cool, professional curiosity. He looked around at them, then back at me, and in his eyes I saw the complete and utter collapse of his world. He had not just been wrong about me, he had been spectacularly, cosmically wrong. His last hope for salvation was the very cute idea he had tried to kill in its cradle. I let the silence stretch, letting him sit with the full weight of his humiliation. Then I picked up his resume from the stack in front of me. I didn't smile, I didn't frown. My expression was perfectly neutral, the expression of a CEO evaluating a potential candidate. I slid the paper across the polished surface of the table toward him. It stopped directly in front of his trembling hands. "Let's begin," I said, my voice calm, clear, and devoid of any emotion he would recognize. "It says here you have extensive experience in brand management. Tell me why you believe that makes you a good fit for my company." Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.